a new day and it's a new year. And for quilters, it's the time to get started making Color My World. This great quilt that was designed by Wendy Williams exclusively for us here at the Quilt Show. It's the only place all of 2021 that you can get the patterns, and you just have to be a star member of the Quilt Show to benefit from this. So I've got a lot to tell you today, so let's get started. The first thing that I want to mention is how many resources we have available for you to learn how to make this quilt. I'd like you to think of it as a year-long comprehensive class on making this quilt and learning all of the things that it can teach you, starting with the freezer paper, folded method freezer paper piecing that we're going to work on today. So if you'll take advantage of all the resources, you'll get a lot of your questions answered and you'll get help. It's not like you're sitting alone in your house and there's nobody to talk to. The resources are out there. So first is the show. Today's show, the new show for 2021 that I've actually taped last August with Ricky in our new studio in Dallas. It came up today and I got to see it for the first time today. It shows me making this small house number 1, and this is small house number 1 that we're working on. This month also we're making small house number 2, and they sure look a lot alike, but they're not exactly the same size. So there's a lot of tips about that to make sure that you get it just right. So the show is certainly something that you will find valuable, and I encourage you before you start to sew these blocks to watch the show. The pattern has so much information. The first pattern this month has a lot of step-by-steps that Wendy has put together with pictures on her process with the folded freezer paper. And so take time to read those things. We've got these videos. They're on our website. Some of them are under introduction, like the one on pre-washing fabric. Some of them are in month 1, these that pertain specifically to what we're doing here. So you can always find them and take advantage of looking at those. I write a blog on the first day of each month. The focus of the blog is on the block of the month quilt for the Quilt Show. The rest of the month I do other things that are quilt related, but on the first of each month, the blog is about, in this case, month 1. And so I have lots of words and I have reminders of things that I've said, am going to say here today. So I hope that you take a look at that. I always post a link to it in the forum, so if you don't follow my blog, you can still see that, oh yeah, she's got that post today, I should look at that. And then that brings me to probably the greatest resource that we have here with the Quilt Show, and that's the forum. It is the place to ask questions and get answers. There will be many. There's already been many. So, for example, there's questions about printing. Everybody's printer is different, and the settings are different, and it is so important that these patterns be printed accurately with the checking that 1-inch scale box. So if you're having a printing problem, that's the place to put a note on a forum, post a topic on the forum, printing problem. Tell us what printer you've got and what the issue is. Someone wrote me last night. She was trying to print from her iPad and she couldn't get the 1-inch scale box correct. So typically we recommend that you download it to a computer, a desktop or a laptop, and print from the download, not from the view file. Making sure that it says, well, my printer's setting says actual. Some printers say 100%. Some printers say no scaling. So you have to know what it is that your printer does to make certain that you get the pattern the correct size. Whenever there's an issue that comes up, if there's something about printing or there's an issue that things aren't clear, I go right to the forum right then and I put a high priority post there on the forum saying, wait, stop, alert, here's something to know. So every day, if you're getting ready to start this, working on the quilt anytime this year, but let's say this month, you're going to work maybe today and a couple days from now, before you start again, just pull up the forum, go into the Color My World, the block of the month topics, and see what people are talking about so that you can see if there's been any corrections that have been posted up or some information that you might find very helpful. Those are resources that are out there and I hope that you'll take advantage of them. Okay, so then there's fabric selection. I've been asked, of course, several times, are each of these fabrics numbered? No. Will we tell you in the pattern which door should be, what color the door should be in this block? No. You are the architect. You are the builder. You're going to make your own houses. So in small house number 1, there's a door, there's windows, there's a roof, and there's a building, plus the background. So the easiest thing I find to do when I started working on this, I took all of the fabrics except the black and white those are for the roads and the background fabric. We need a wider piece for the background fabric. But I cut everything else. I had about 24 solid fabrics. With the fabric across the width, so somewhere in the 40-inch range or so, I cut a strip from each of those fabrics 3.5 inches. 3.5 inches is about the widest that you would need on most of these small pieces that you cut for the houses. And that gives you all of your fabrics. Put the rest of it away. You've cut from that 1/3 of a yard if you got the kit, cut a 3.5-inch strip, put all the rest of those fabrics away and only work from this 3.5-inch strip until you run out of that 3.5 strip, which I'm here to tell you is several months from now. Before then, you can cut another strip. It's just the best way. Then you've got all your fabrics laid out, and you can say, oh, this building should be blue. It should have green leaves. It should have or green windows. The door is going to be brown, that kind of thing. And you can lay them out like that. So that's the best way to cut your fabric. Make a 3.5-inch strip of every fabric that you're using for the houses. I will just mention that in the beginning when I got this kit, the blues, the 2 blues, there was more of that because it's used for the Mariner's Compass, and we'll do that next month, and the 2 greens for the various trees. And I was concerned about them, so I didn't use them in the small houses, but it became clear to me once I got the trees made that I certainly could be using those greens in that buildings itself. So when I got to the tall buildings, which are the big outside ring, I started using the greens and the blues more. So just rest assured you have enough fabric. You can right from the beginning also be including the light blue and medium blue and the 2 greens if you got our kit, or if you put your fabrics together similar to the kit. And you know, one green's as good as another. So if you did run out, you could get a different green and it would still be fine. Make the quilt just yours. Okay. So the first thing, I'm going to show you a few videos this morning. The first one I'm going to start with is a quick little video of demonstrating how to sew along the edge of the paper. My videographer, who happens to be my son, who is a professional videographer, helped me with the regular videos, but he had stationary cameras and he didn't get behind me. And so my hand is in the way. You can't see what I'm trying to show you as I'm sewing, and it drives me nuts. So I did a simple little video the other day, and I'm going to show that to you right now just so you can see what the stitching looks like. So let's take a look at that. All right, the first thing I want to mention is a single hole throat plate will be very helpful in all of this piecing, including the paper piecing. A single hole throat plate is this one here on my right. It has just a hole large enough for the needle to go up and down. You can't zigzag or do decorative stitches with this single hole throat plate. But it also protects the fabric from being pushed down into the hole. This is a 9mm throat plate designed for my machine. I can do all sorts of decorative stitches, and you can see it's a big wide opening there. So if you have a choice between a single hole throat plate and a wide decorative stitch throat plate, you definitely want to use the single hole throat plate. My machine also allows me to tell it that that's what I have installed there, and that will prevent me from accidentally changing to a decorative stitch and breaking a needle, or worse, to my machine. So if you don't have that as an option, what you want to do, a sticky note, a note to yourself somewhere to remind you that you have got a single hole throat plate there and do not change to a decorative stitch. All right, I just want to do this demo so you can see, come up there, how the stitching actually looks. I've got the first piece. This is small house number 1. There's the door, which is in place. I know that because I've marked it door. It's piece H. And so I've got this ready. And now I'm going to put, again, we'll look at this. Seam 1 joins A to H. So I turn that over and I place these right sides together. These pieces are oversized. They're oversized cut, which is fine. You're going to trim them later when you get done. So I've got those lined up just right. I turn it over and fold back the paper. We have already pre-folded this paper, so it goes right back where it's supposed to go. I start out there on the edge. Good. Okay, you might want to slow it down a little bit. And I'm going to stitch right up against that. Autofocus that any better. It's still a little hard to see. right? I'm stitching right along. I'm checking the camera as I go. All right, I'll take this out. You can see stitching right along. The needle is actually rubbing up against the paper. Now, remember when you pull it out to hold on to the fabric and the paper. If you just grab the paper, as I'm inclined to do, since I've paper pieced for years, you would forget that it's not attached. And then you can very easily have the fabric in one hand and the paper in another. So let me see if you can see this as closely as I want you to see it. Let me see if I can get this camera in here. Ah, that might be better. Okay. Okay. Yes. All right. I've run this stitch right along the paper. Now, two things can happen. You see here at the end, I veered off. I'm a couple of threads off. I could go right back in and close that up, just stitch right on top of it. Or you can sometimes accidentally get over here on the paper and take a couple of stitches in the paper before you figure out what you're doing and get back over here. Take it out of the machine, pull out those 2 or 3 stitches that are in the paper, and then go back a ½ inch on either side of it and close it up again. So that's the process of freezer paper, stitching with the paper. Once I got this done, I open this piece out and spread it. I would finger press it for right this minute, and then I'm ready to put the other side over here, the seam number 2. I would do the exact same thing here. Once both of these are placed, pressed, I take it to the iron so I can get it nice and flat, and then I'm ready to attach the third piece, which is seam number 3, as it tells you right there. Okay, so that's what I wanted you to see, the close-up of the stitching. Now we're going to look at the video of more of this process of the entire thing with a lot more information. I am in the video showing tall building number 1 or 3 right side, and it's one of the blocks for later on, but the process that I'm demonstrating is the same, and so I just want you to be able to understand what you're looking at in this video is the process, but it's not this exact same block. So let's take a look at that one. Hi everybody, I'm Barbara Black. Welcome to my studio. I'm going to be working with you on our journey this year to make Color My World, the 2021 block of the month, designed for the quilt show as an exclusive design made by Wendy Williams, an Australian designer. Now we're going to look at how to sew using the paper patterns. If you've not ever done freezer paper patterns before for foundation sewing, it may be a little different than anything you've ever done. So it was for me, and so I've learned some real advantages to using this particular method. So I've prepped the pattern piece for this, section 1. I'm going to be making tall building number 3 right side, and I know that because I've written those words on each of my pattern piece. This is a picture of what tall building number 3 right side looks like. There is also tall building number 3 left side, but they are not just an exact mirror image of each other. Tall building number 3 right side has 6 windows and the left side has 8 windows. So they are not exactly the same, which is why I don't make the left side and the right side at the same time. I'm only going to work on the right sides. There are 4 right side tall building number 3 right sides in the quilt. There are also 4 tall building number 3 left sides in the quilt. There are additional tall buildings as well as small houses and skyscrapers and a lot of other buildings as well. So the pattern I have printed off. I did find it helpful to print in color so that I could really see what I was doing when I made my fabric selections. On the pattern itself, for each month, there's very carefully constructed cutting instructions so that you can be sure that you have the correct fabrics cut. I have them laid out as I worked on them. My tall building number 3 right side, this one is going to be an orange building. It's going to have hot pink windows, has a purple door, and these tall buildings have a shadow to them. This particular shadow is the orange color. So I've got each one cut out and they are listed here. So when I look at the first pattern, section 1, tall building number 3 right side, section 1, I need a D, and when I look at D, that's the door. So there's my door fabric. I'm going to need 2 A's. The A's are the building themselves, and that's the orange. And because I've laid these out the way I cut them, I could find my A's, 1.5 by 3s. So I've got those pieces. And then I'm going to need B at the top, and B is a 1.5 by 6. And there are 5 of those in the entire block. So I only need 1 of them at this point. So these are the 4 pieces that I'm going to need in order to sew this first piece. I have prepped the pattern by doing folding on all the lines and have that all finished. Now it's just a matter of getting started. I'm going to use a hot, dry iron. You don't want water in your iron when we're dealing with paper. The first thing I do is lay down my door fabric on the my ironing surface, and I'm able to see pretty well where to line this up. The pattern pieces are cut oversized. They're larger than they need to be so that we have a little wiggle room. So I can see about where I want to put this. I try to line up the one edge with about 1/4 inch so I don't have to trim it as well. I'm going to use the hot dry iron and just put that in place. First I press on the paper side, then I turn it over and you press on the fabric side. Now remember, this is all wax here. So if you put the entire iron down on top of the iron, you'll be peeling off the paper from the sole of your hot iron. That is not recommended. So I just want to try to only get the iron on the fabric on that particular place. So I have this ready to sew, and I found what's helpful for me once this door fabric is secured to the center is I can go ahead as well and trim the other side as well, the seam number 2. We're going to sew number 1 first, then we're going to sew number 2. So here is a really handy dandy way to trim and make these pieces just the way you want to use them. I'm going to use the add 1/4 ruler. I have used this ruler for years and years. This is a great ruler for all kind of paper piecing. I've got a postcard here that I've put on that line for the second seam, and I have to remove some of this. That wax is holding this pretty well. So I just want to pull this back, and I use the lip of the add 1/4 ruler in order to trim away the extra fabric. Now I've got both seams ready to go where I'm going to be able to sew the other pieces on here. Now one of the most important things that I want to talk about with this method is that we do not sew through the paper. And as someone who had paper pieced for many years, always sewing through the paper, this took me a little time to get used to. You want to be as careful as possible to be sure that that fabric, in this case the door, is securely pressed, firmly pressed to the paper. Once I've sewn this, I have not sewn through the paper. And if I'm not careful, I can have the paper in one hand and the fabrics in the other, and I have to really fiddle around to get them back, lined up exactly where they should be. So it's best to not let that happen if possible. So let's go to the sewing machine and I will show you the beauty of how we're going to sew this. We're now ready to sew these pieces together. I've got the seam number 1 is where I'm going to join a piece A, which is my building, to the door on this side of the fabric. So I'm going to line those up just right, but in order to sew this, I have to fold the pattern back. That wax has secured, the door fabric is secured on there, so I had to pull it back just a little bit, but that's not a problem. I've got that ready to go. And I line them up, so I've got about 1/4 inch seam allowance, fairly close, so I've got that in there. So another advantage to this method of doing the freezer paper sewing is, as I mentioned before, we're not having to change the stitch length. I've got a regular piecing stitch length. In my case, I like to use 2.0 on my machine. I'm also using my 1/4 inch foot and a single hole throat plate, which I find gives me the best, most precise seams. So I'm ready to sew through this. And the trick is that I am going to want to sew these stitches right up alongside the paper, but not through the paper. And that's the thing that I found that just took me just a little bit of time to get the hang of it. Don't go really fast. If you have a speed control on your machine, and you tend to keep it on Jackrabbit, turn it back down a little bit more toward slow, the turtle side. You just want to be accurate is more important than fast. So I have this first one on here, and now I'm ready to take this out of the machine. Again, remember that you have not sewn through the paper, so it's important to hold on to this and not have the door fabric and the seam you've just sewn come apart from the paper. If you have your setup, as I don't, but a lot of people I know do, have an ironing setup right beside them where they can swivel from one to the other, that would be handy because you could simply move to the other side. But I don't have mine like that, and I say it's the aerobics portion of my day. I get up from my sewing machine and go to the iron. Because I had trimmed the other side for seam number 2, I don't have to iron right now. I can go ahead and get seam number 2 sewn on. So I folded back the paper, and I want to line up my building. There we go. And now I'm ready to sew again a 1/4 inch seam. You're sewing right beside the paper, not through the paper. If you accidentally sew through the paper, which I did once or twice, I just take it out, rip out those 2 or 3 stitches, and go back in and just sew again and not have the paper in there. So you don't want to sew through the paper. Okay, I've sewn both of these seams. Now I go back to my ironing setup so that I can prepare to sew a piece number 3 onto the little section 1. Okay, we're back at the iron. I've sewn on seam 1 and 2, and they just have to be secured to the freezer paper foundation. I'm using a hot, dry iron again, and I'm securing. First I press on the paper side, or on the fabric side, and then I press on the paper side. Now in order to get ready to sew the 3rd seam, I need to trim this top edge. I'm going to use my postcard, lay it along the number 3 line, and pull this back, pull the paper back, and then again my add a 1/4 ruler gives me an exact 1/4 inch where it needed to go. This one little building side over here, he's slightly less than a 1/4. That's perfectly fine. I wouldn't want it much less than that, but I didn't put it quite as high up as it should have been. So I've got that ready to go. Now I'm going to take the next piece of fabric. It doesn't hurt to double check. This is fabric B. I look on the list for fabric B. That's a building, again is orange, 1.5 by 6 inches. So I take this piece, my fabric B, and I am ready to go back to the sewing machine to add this last piece on there. Now we're ready to sew this final seam for this section 1 of the tall building number 3 right side. Notice that this this piece that goes on here, B, is significantly longer than it needs to be. That's because as we make the other sections, we also have the same section B, and they need to be longer as you go on some of the other sections. So rather than have a whole lot of different pieces, some of the pieces were just cut extra long, and that's fine. It just helps you to not have to keep many pieces organized. So again, I'm going to start sewing along the edge, and I want to be right along the edge of the folded back paper. So along there. I had this one side of the building over here where it was a little skimpy. I'm just leaving that where it would normally be. Nobody's going to see the inside of that seam allowance to know that that one seam allowance is slightly less, but I have plenty of fabric on the outside. I've got this part all done. Check on the front. Now I'm ready to go back to the iron for the last time and secure this section 1 for tall building number 3 right side. All right, we're back at the ironing board. I've put the final piece of the building onto the pattern. I want to make sure that I've got my pattern folded up so that I'm going to actually press this with the hot iron and put the fabric onto the paper. Again, a good strong press. You want it firmly attached to the paper. Okay. When these papers are first used, there's a lot of wax. I'm going to use these patterns 4 times to make tall building number 3 right side, and 4 times with the other set of paper patterns for tall building number 3 left side. By the time I get to the 4th one, there may not be a lot of wax left, so I simply use a fabric glue stick pen for just a couple little dots if I find that there's not quite enough wax being held. I've got this pattern piece all done, and now I'm ready to trim it. Remember when we first cut out the paper, we used left a little small margin of extra fabric paper all around. Now we have to trim this to precisely the right size. I'm going to use a ruler with a good 1/4 inch line, and I'm going to measure from the seam allowance out 1/4 inch. If you lay your ruler on the edge of the paper and trim each time just from that outside edge, it would only take one time of trimming too close and cutting some of that excess off that now your pattern is too small. I always measure from the 1/4 inch line out. So I line up the 1/4 inch line on the seam allowance line. That's this line right here. That is the seam allowance line, and I put my 1/4 inch ruler and I can trim this excess away. That's trash. Turn it over to the other side, and I'm going to repeat on the left and right and the top sides. Okay. Double check before you cut it that you have it on the right line. You do not want to cut this too small, because then you get to start all over again. Got that one lined up. Okay. Now I've done the top and the left and right sides, but I want you to see that the bottom is actually slightly curved. So I can't just lay the ruler on here and go straight across like that. I need to do it in little bites. So I'm going to put this 1/4 inch line right here on to be able to start the curve. Go forward just a little, making sure that I'm keeping the 1/4 inch line all the way. And there's not a big curve, but there is a slight curve as I go around. So now I've got the piece completely prepped. It's ready to go. When I have made this is section 1. When I make section 2, then 3, then 4, all the remaining pattern pieces. See, we've still got section 2 to do, section 3 to do. Then I'm going to take the paper off, and I will sew section 1 to 2, and then 2 to 3, and on like that till we make the entire block. This is tall building number 3, right side, and the right side means that the shadow is on the right side of this building. So there are a total of 32 tall buildings in the quilt. There are a total of 32 small houses in the quilt, along with some 4 skyscrapers, 4 little houses in the city, and the Mariner's Compass Center along with the road. So this is the basic process of how you make the sections, and then each section you will remove the paper before you sew it to the next piece. And I'm going to show you something that's important to know about that. Remember that we have not sewn through the paper, so it comes off quite easily usually. But this paper is brand new. I haven't used this yet, and there's a lot of wax. So I find that I really, I want to be careful. So here's what happened just now. I pulled this back without being certain that I got the purple off, and I have unstitched that seam along there just a little bit. That needs to be fixed. So I want to be careful in taking this apart. It is quite secure, as you can see. So by pulling this back, and you want to be careful with it. Okay, so all I have to do here is just go back to my sewing machine, and then I'll secure those stitches there. The other side did not come out. It's fine. So the paper is still plenty waxy. I will have no trouble making the remaining tall buildings number 3 right sides from this one set of paper patterns. That'll do it for now. I hope you enjoy the process. Okay, so I think you've heard me say several times we're not sewing through the paper, and to hold on to them when you take them out of the machine. I'm a firm believer that when you're learning a new process, the more times you can hear the important parts, the better. So we've got this kind of information. When the first house or two, if this is a brand new technique to you, is going to be a little learning curve, and just be gentle with yourself. You have all month to make 16 houses. There are 8 small houses number 1 and 8 small houses number 2. I think I mentioned that I don't try to do them at the same time because it really would be confusing. The angles are different, the doors are different. So I made the 8 ones, and then I switched to the 8 small house number 2s. Okay, and what you saw in that, as I mentioned, was tall building number 3, right side. This is the section 1 of small house number 1. It's the same, it has a door and 3 parts of the building. It was just a little different picture. The tall building is bigger, so it has a wider base, but this is the same process. And fortunately, this month with small house 1 and 2, we have section 1 and section 2, and that's it. When you've joined section 1 to section 2, the first small house number 1 is finished. And then you'll go ahead, as I said, and make the others. Okay, just an update on the kits. If you hadn't seen that a day or 2 ago, the emails went out, the kits were back in. I saw posted early this morning in the newsletter that more than half of them are gone again, and there will not be more after. So if you are interested in the kits, now would be the time today to jump in there and order your kit. You can certainly make this quilt perfectly great without the kit, but if you want it, it's great to have it all together. I really enjoyed working with these fabrics and having it ready to go. Okay, let me see. I'm going to check and look at the questions to see if there's any questions that I really need to answer. The next live will be, and going forward for the rest of the year, the plan is at this point that I will do live on the first Thursday of each month. And for February, that's February 7th. The block is the Mariner's Compass block, and we'll make that in a similar method to this. My blog will go up on the first of the month. The pattern is available on the first of the month. So, and the forum, ask me questions if you get stuck. And then we'll do the live, as I said, on the 7th of February is the date for that. Okay, I'm going to take a look at questions and see if there are any. Okay. Did you pre-wash all the fabrics? Yes, I did. I do that when there's a kit so that I have a general idea of what you might experience with your kit. There's a video on the pre-washing process. I've written about that. Where did I see that? So where do I get the... I'm I'm glad you asked about the background because I have one more video to show you. I'll be coming back to that here in just a second. Print the pattern. Let's talk about the printed freezer paper. Yes, you have your pattern is on the freezer paper, but if you have a laserjet printer and you can't run your freezer paper through your laserjet, these are simple enough patterns. You could actually draw them on freezer paper with a pencil, trace them over, print the pattern on regular paper, and then trace the pattern and get it right if you wanted to. It'd be a lot more work, but that would be the case. You're asking about my blog. The blog is called My Joyful Journey. It's also the address is bbquiltmaker.blogspot.com. If you Google my name and blog, it'll come right up. Tip to keep to do. Yeah, there's Christine suggests that as you saw how hard it was for me when that paper was brand new, to just the first time before you use it, just give it one quick iron and press on a scrap fabric. That'll pick up a little bit of the excess wax. People are asking if you wanted to use different backgrounds. That was asked last time I did a live. There is a forum discussion on that. I went back and looked to see what the yardage was. I think for the inner side it was 2 yards and the outside 3 yards, but check that. It's on the forum. It's a great question. It wouldn't have occurred to me to use a different background, but several people want to do it that way, especially if they're working from their stash and they don't have 4 1/4 yards. Okay. I'm going to talk about the background here in just a minute. Where do you get the kit? The kit fabrics are from thequiltshow.com, the store. The patterns are in the block of the month on thequiltshow.com. Yes, the quilt videos are available on the Quilt Show. Go to under Learn, go to the block of the month, and you'll find them right there where in the section that most pertains to, like this is month 1, so they're going to pertain to month 1. The schedule says February 4th for Mara's Compass. I'll have to check the calendar. I'm lucky to know what day of the week it is. I keep thinking today is Sunday. It is the 4th. It's not the 7th. It's the first Thursday. Thank you for that. It is the 4th. Donna caught that. The schedule says that. That's right. Okay, let me go back to the... Come back to you. Okay. I almost forgot. One of the most important things is to talk about the background cutting. As I mentioned, the first thing when I started this, that you don't cut the background into a 3.5 inch strip. I'm going to show you how to do that now. So guess what? I have a video. So let's take a look at the video. Now I'm going to show you how to cut the background fabric for our small house number 1. The pattern instructions have you cut 2 oversized rectangles, one that's this side for the size for the smaller one side. And if you look at it this side, you can see. Here's a small piece, it's J, and here's the large piece for small house number 1, it's K. The small piece is cut from this rectangle, and the large one is cut from this rectangle. Okay. I've already trimmed this edge here, so I know where to place the first one. I did that by folding it back as you normally would, trim the edge and get it ready. Now I take this rectangle and put it here. You want to make sure that you have enough down here to cover the edge of the paper. Oops, let me get there. Cover the paper. And that you have yet still enough that'll get you up there to the top. So let me just put a pin for a moment. And I often check, especially on these angles like this, where it's hard to tell that you have it placed right. I do a pin, I open it up, turn it over, and make sure. And I have just enough right here. Not a whole lot extra, but just enough. This is all going to be waste, and this is going to be waste. But save this big piece, because there are going to be plenty of times further down the road where we're cutting smaller pieces of background, and this will be plenty to be able to cut it up. Let's say you needed a piece that was 2 by 3. You could cut a 2 by 3 out of here. You can't cut a 2 by 3 out of that piece. So that's how this rectangle would go. You'd sew that, flip it open, trim this line here, and put the other rectangle on it. It would go this way. We open this up. Okay, check ourselves to make sure. And once again, since it's not sewn, moved right. And I've got enough that I've covered the angles all the way around. But one of the things about this that I thought maybe I could do something different is that this generates a lot of waste, as I mentioned, and this is all bias along these edges where I'm going to join these houses together. Here's the straight of grain out here on the outside, which puts bias right there on those edges. So I did come up with a different way of cutting these pieces. If you want to just follow the directions, by all means, that's perfectly fine. If this next method helps you and makes more sense, then give that a try as well. So we have patterns for this method. This, I call it speed cutting the background fabrics for houses, small houses 1 and 2. This way I cut a width of fabric strip. That's from selvage to selvage, 5.5 inches wide. For the large pieces, which is going to be this one, the K piece, the large one, I needed a rectangle that's 5.5 inches long. So this is 5.5 by 7.5. And for the small one, it's 5.5 by 6. And I've got those cut there. They are not exactly the same. And you do need the 2 pieces for the small side and the larger side. Okay. But the most important thing to be aware of is that it depends, because these are angles that are reverse mirror image, that we cut the fabrics either face up or face down, depending on where it's going to go in the pattern. So this is the large side, it's K for small house number 1. We cut the fabric face up. I've already cut one here so you can see why. That is the piece, K piece for small house number 1. It goes here. And I need it to be face up so that when I place it this way and open it, this is what I get instead of the back side of the fabric. So small house number 1, cut with fabric face up. For the smaller piece, small house number 1, piece J, that's this one, we need to cut with fabric face down. And that's like this. I've gone ahead and drawn a pencil line just so you can see it, and that's how I would do these, even cut them. I would stack up several of them, put a pencil mark at these 2 edges where the lines come, and just cut through that pencil line. when I cut that off, it's going to generate the piece that I need to go on this side. So I have a face, cut this one face down, cut, where did you go? Oh, you're under here. Cut this one face up, and that will generate the two pieces that I need. If you accidentally, when we get to small house number 2, they're just the opposite. Small house number 1 was face down for the small piece, but small house number 2 is face up. And for the larger piece, as I said, it's just the opposite. Small house face up, face down. If you accidentally cut the wrong ones, just save them, put them aside, because right now we're making this month 8 small house number 1s and 8 small house number 2s. In March, the month 3, we will make 8 small house number 3 and 8 small house number 4. The size is exactly the same. They are just cut in the opposite directions, face up, face down. So you're just simply, if you cut some the wrong way this month, save them for month 3 and you'll be ahead in the cutting for month 3. And that's all there is to it for this speedy method. I liked this because it didn't generate nearly as much waste. When I put this piece on the back side, this one's cut, so it's a little hard to see. There's a little bit of waste, but I'm going to put this angle so you can see exactly how it would go. A lot less than the other way, and I've got pretty much straight of grain around those 2 outside edges. So that's my suggestion. Give it a try and see what you think. Okay, I have to chuckle when I said, oh, that's all there is to it. For the last 12 hours, we've been going back and forth. Is it face up or face down? Is piece 1 face up or is piece 2 face down? Small house 1, small house 2. So we had these PDFs up. We took them down late last night so we can revise them and make absolutely certain that they are correct. Now, if you have all 16 houses done right now, except for the background, I am amazed. What have you been doing? But we will have this. The plan is it'll be back up today, the PDF. If by some chance you discovered it yesterday and you printed the 2 PDFs, when we get the ones that we know 100% are correct, then make sure that you check it, that it matches. It's the issue of face up, face down. The other thing that we discovered, this is a real team effort, and there's one of the wonderful editors that I love working with in the Quilt Show who is also making this quilt, and so she got started, and she discovered that for small house number 2, that the piece 1, the smaller one, the 6-inch measurement just doesn't, it gets it, but no wiggle room at all. I made it work, but there was no wiggle room at all. And so she suggested that we make that 7 inches. So we have redesigned, as I mentioned, the PDF for the small sizes. Let me just hold up the building again. This is small house number 1. We're talking about this smaller, other side, that way, the smaller side. For small house number 1, 6 inches long works just fine. But when we go to small house number 2, even though it appears to be exactly the same size, it's over here, a 7-inch rectangle would be better. So we've clarified that in the PDF. As I said, we're just working now on, as I mentioned during the sewing, accurate is more important than fast. So it's much more important to me that we get this PDF 100% accurate so there's no confusion for you. And as I mentioned in that little video, if you just want to follow the pattern instructions that Wendy has written and cut the rectangles the sizes that she says, that certainly works just fine. I was just coming up with a way that I thought was more efficient. One of my slogans is I want the fastest method that gives me the result I want. And the result I want here is accurately cut pieces that are the right size. So we're working on that. I'm really looking forward to this year, to working with you. Again, if you'll think of this as a comprehensive class for the entire year that can teach you a lot of things, that might help you to really take the time to look at the various resources that we've put together to really help. As I said in the last live, I want you to be successful. The Quilt Show wants you to be successful, and Wendy wants you to be successful with this quilt. So I hope that you'll take advantage of that stuff. So I will see you again on February 4th, the first Thursday of February, where we will do the Mariner's Compass. And until then, that's a wrap.